Hi from the UK. Thank you so much for this award. I'm sorry I can't be with you to claim it in person, just a mixture of commitments and health things, but I really do appreciate it. And even though I know this isn't an Oscar ceremony, I would like to thank a couple of people who have played the most important part in my intellectual life. The first is Seymour Papert. I first met Seymour in 1980 or 81, and it just opened my eyes to a possibility that I'd never entertained before, that people really could learn mathematics by building stuff. I come from a generation of mathematicians who weren't allowed in their undergraduate studies to touch computers because they were somehow dirty compared to the cleanness of abstract mathematics. And to meet Seymour and find a like-minded person in those days was absolutely critical for me. So thank you, Seymour, I miss you. I want to say the second person I want to thank is Celia Hoyles. We've worked together for 30-something years. It doesn't bear calculating. And we've been partners in life partner sense as well as colleague sense for many years. Again, I don't like to count exactly how many. I thought it would be interesting, well, interesting for me anyway, to have a look more closely at the maker movement, where it's been, where it's going, and I hope you don't think that's a bit presumptuous of me, who's never been part of the maker movement explicitly. I feel a bit like Monsieur Jourdain, a rather pompous little character from a French play by Molière, who discovered at the age of 40 that he'd been speaking prose all his life, but didn't realize it was prose. And I think I've, in some part, been making stuff and thinking about making stuff for the whole of my academic career. But I didn't know it was called the maker movement. I thought it was called constructionism or whatever. But this isn't a competition. I think that there are many different communities that are participating in this kind of way. And I think there's a historical reason for that, which I'll come to. So let me first of all congratulate you on your ambition for your conference. What role does maker education play in a world with growing social and environmental challenges? Well, I'll say social and environmental challenges is an underestimate of what we face, and it's not completely clear that there'll be anybody left to face it in 500 years, maybe less than that. But I think that's a very ambitious intention, and I wanted to just say a couple of words about it before I go on. When Celia and I wrote Windows on Mathematical Meanings, that's the end of the 1990s, we took a rather, I think looking back now, I think we took a somewhat individualistic position on the learning of mathematics through computers. That is to say, we thought about individual learning, we thought about the kinds of knowledge structures that people would develop using computers in ambitious ways. And if looking back now, maybe we were a bit neglectful of the social and political dimensions of the problem. I think even Seymour was too, and one of the last conversations I had with him, he admitted as much. So I think that intellectual empowerment was conceived, and maybe still is conceived, as a personal achievement, that building stuff to understand mathematics or any other subject is a personal achievement and not really a social question. Well, looking back now, I think that was a short-sighted view. I think that what is just now, I'll just point to one direction our research has taken us into, but we now are picking up that the scratch maths work that I've undertaken here with Celia, that's really designing a new mathematics curriculum based around programming has taken off amongst thousands of kids around the world, unknown to us. And I think there is still space and time for people to do much more work in that direction, to think about how individuals are empowered by this kind of knowledge. But we did look at a more socially oriented dimension, and by the end of the last century we turned our attention to mathematics at work. And we looked at the kind of mathematical knowledge and skills that matter in the automated workplace. The traditional, at the time anyway, the traditional opinion was that people needed less and less technical knowledge. You heard people say things like, what's the point of understanding how it works? The computer is going to do it for you. And there was a general agreement, I think, wrongly in my view, general agreement that people didn't really have to know too much because the computer was what mattered. And so we went and had a look in various workplaces. We looked at car manufacturing, nursing. We looked at new kinds of knowledge in banking. Oh, let me just give you a little anecdote that will give you a sense of this. We went to work in an investment bank where the chief executive officer of the bank, brackets, $1 million minimum investment, had read a book about Logo and got in touch with us, and we started working in this bank and interviewing the people working there, and we came across this very senior administrative officer in the bank who I interviewed one day, and I said to her, you know, if you had $100 and you added 10%, then you took away 10%, what would the amount be that you had left? And she looked at me, she said, yeah, I've heard this one before. This is a trick, isn't it? She said, I know it's not 100. And I said, well, how do you know it's not 100? She said, well, because I know numbers are funny that way. This is a person in a senior role in an investment bank, and you should know that a very short time later, the world faced its first massive banking crisis, and you may feel that there's some blame that could be attached to us, or at least to somebody, not sure who. That was nearly 20 years ago, and it's worth asking who is winning this struggle between, let's call it, empowerment and alienation. Empowerment, people believing and showing how understanding the system is a plus for companies and workplaces, and people who really just resigned to the fact that we are all becoming, whether we like it or not, more and more alienated from the systems that underpin our lives. I think I've just read the new book by Shoshana Zuboff, which is just massively interesting, and she is really created a new lens through which to view what Google and Facebook and so on are doing, and she is very ambitiously calling it a new variant of capitalism. So she's saying the characteristic ways in which people live their lives, their working lives, their social lives, that has been true for the 19th century and the 20th century, and for some countries before that, is now breaking down, and she has named this new movement, this new direction, surveillance capitalism, which she says works by providing free services for billions of people, enabling the service providers to monitor the behavior of those users in astonishing detail, And we know, don't we, that often without their explicit consent. So why am I raising this particular book? Well, I think that she makes a convincing case that this new phase of capitalism, as she calls it, is inherently anti-democratic. It will strip us of what makes us human, it will destroy our relationships, and it will accentuate social inequalities. And this is a challenge, isn't it? I mean, the maker movement, the constructionist movement, is based on the belief that building stuff for yourself, reflecting on what you've built, discussing what you've built, the knowledge that underpins what you've built, is something that has some educational value. And yet what she's saying, what Zuboff is saying, is that, as she puts it, once we searched Google, but now Google searches us. That's chilling, isn't it? Once we thought of digital services as free, but now surveillance capitalists think of us as free. So we are part of a great big Truman show in which we are being, in a way, manipulated as puppets from the puppet masters, and I suppose puppet mistresses, I have no idea. That's a chilling view for us that we have to acknowledge. And I think it means that the challenge that you face, that you've very nicely summed up in the title of your conference, is demanding an aware view of what the knowledge that's necessary is. Necessary for the continuation of the system as a whole. The challenge, I think, is the challenge that we faced at the end of the 20th century, to build knowledge into empowering activities. But the challenge that we face now, as the second decade of the new century comes into being, I think we will have to be much more aware than we were in the 1990s, how empowering activities really interface with the social and political and economic changes that are whirling around us. It isn't an accident that the world is in such political and economic chaos, least of all in your country and my country, but that's another talk. So for the moment, thank you again for your award to me. I appreciate it very, very much. I particularly appreciate that the next generation, you young people, have decided to take forward a movement that's been going on for at least 50 or 60 years, and it's over to you. I look forward to seeing what happens next. Thank you very much.